guys, it's Crystal. I hope you guys are all doing well and that you've had a good past couple weeks. I'm sorry, I know I wasn't around. I ended up with a really severe ear infection, so I was hoping that my hearing would be back fully before I filmed again. I feel better, but my ear is not 100%, so if I'm talking loud, I'm really, really sorry. Sorry, guys. But I do hope that you guys have had a good past couple weeks and that everything is going well for you. If you guys are new to this channel, like I said, my name is Crystal and I do Canadian true crime or true crime with a Canadian twist. From time to time, if you guys have perused through my library, you'll notice I also do international crimes, particularly Ted Bundy. Oh God, that lasted forever. I do them just because they're interesting to me, because people have recommended them. If you guys do want to recommend cases, just let me know down below. I'll be happy to look into them, especially if they're Canadian cases. But I also like to show the differences in the justice systems from other places as well, because not every system is the same. Obviously, the States is vastly different from Canada. Canada is different from the UK, not as much, but somewhat, and so on and so forth. If that sounds like something that's interesting to you guys, please hit that old like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell. It might work and it might not, and leave me some comments. I'm going to say it because you guys know I always do, particularly about today's case. If you guys do choose to leave comments though, please, no hate. There is enough hate out there in the world, and we are just here to talk about things. These videos are for educational or entertainment purposes only, so they're not meant with any disrespect at all. If you guys are returning subscribers, of course, you guys already know how much I love you and how thankful I am that you guys chose to subscribe to me and listen to me. Sometimes I ramble a lot, you guys know. You guys already know. And for today, I wore one of the most iconic Canadian shirts I could find, Degrassi. I am a huge Degrassi fan, guys. This is Spike from Degrassi. If you guys know me really well, you guys know how much I love the Degrassi. So today's case, actually, we're going to be talking about a woman named Cindy James. You guys may already know who she is. I know other YouTubers have talked about her before, but I decided to give my spin on it. It's a really interesting case. It's technically solved. We're just going to leave it at that. So Cindy James was actually born Cynthia Elizabeth Hack on June 12th of 1944. Her parents are Otto and Melinda. I just want to get it right because I always say it wrong. Melinda Hack. Her mother's nickname was Tilly, so we're going to use that in our video just so that we're not, I don't know, I guess messing things up, because you guys know I will. She was, like I said, the oldest of 6, and her siblings' names were Doug, Marlene, Roger, Ken, and Melanie Hack. They don't feature as much into here. I just wanted to let you guys know. So Cindy was born in a small place called Oliver. It's a town of about 5,000 people in the Okanagan Valley. I think it's the southern end of the Okanagan Valley in British Columbia. At some point in time, the family relocated to BC. I don't know if it was before or after Cindy was married though, guys. Sorry, they relocated to Richmond, BC. So we're going to be mostly focusing in Richmond, but she was born in Oliver, just to clear that up, guys. So Cindy was a very beautiful girl. I'm going to show you guys pictures in a little bit. She was a very smart girl. She was kind, she was compassionate, and she loved children. She didn't have any kids of her own, but she did love children and she loved to work with children. At the age of 19, Cindy married a man named Dr. Roy Makepeace. This would have been in 1963 or 1964, depending on what month they got married. Dr. Roy was about 18 years older than her, but the marriage seemed to get along, seemed to go fine for at least a little while, guys. And Dr. Roy Makepeace was about 18 years older than Cindy, like I said before, and he was a psychiatrist. Cindy herself graduated from nursing school in 1966 with a nursing degree, and she worked at a local hospital. She also became the administrator at some point in time, the administrator, I should say, for a preschool that dealt with kids with emotional and behavioral problems. So she worked both jobs and she loved working both jobs. She was specifically a counselor to these children. Like I said, she seemed to be happy in her marriage for at least a little while, but by 1982, her marriage to Dr. Roy Makepeace was deteriorating. And in July of 1982, Cindy herself filed for divorce. It doesn't seem like it was an acrimonious divorce, though, guys. Cindy would have been about 36 at this time, and Dr. Roy would have been 54, give or take. It doesn't seem like it was incredibly acrimonious, but they did a divorce. Now, I don't know what specific reasons were for the divorce, guys. I don't know why they divorced, but they just said in the articles that their marriage deteriorated to some extent. So it was about 4 months later, in November, give or take, of 1982, that the start of Cindy's nightmare began. She started to receive strange and mysterious phone calls. These were not threatening phone calls at that point in time, but they spooked her enough that she told her family that she was getting them. And it wasn't just once in a while, it was fairly regularly. These were very strange phone calls. Now, if you guys don't know, I didn't add it this time, and I always do. Richmond, BC has a population of about 2,000, let me say it right, 2,000, or 200, 16,000, sorry guys, 288 people. It's actually a suburb of Vancouver proper. It's well known for its art, it's well known for its culture, it's well known for its outdoor sports and cycling trails, things of that nature. A lot of things that are well known for in BC. Richmond, BC is well known for. It's actually the home of Rick Hansen, if you guys remember, the guy that wheelchaired across Canada to raise money for a specific charity. It's also the home of Ryan Stiles. He was on Whose Line Is It Anyway in the Drew Carey Show, but I know him from Whose Line Is It Anyway. He's so friggin' funny. I love him. And also it's the home of actor Shawn Ashmore. Richmond is really well known for trying to preserve its agricultural farms as well as its environment as well, guys. They do a lot of work with that. And of course, cultural things as well. According to an article from April of 2021, Richmond has already had, and it might be more now, guys, 16 murders thus far. It's not a hugely violent place, but it's also not the safest place in Canada to be. It ranks about 85th in the 229 places that they chose from Canada to do a statistic on. And that would make it not super safe, but also obviously not the worst place to live. It's very expensive to live in Richmond, BC, though, but it does have a lot of great schools and a lot of great culture and art as well, guys. It's not particularly dangerous, but it's dangerous enough. So, like I said, these phone calls were starting to bother Cindy, so she mentioned them to her family. And according to her mom, Tilly, she didn't recognize the voice that was at the end of the phone line, and she said it was just some type of voice. She never recognized who it was. It was just some voice. Apparently, quote, sometimes it would change the sound of the voice, and sometimes it was just whispering. Sometimes it was just silence, end quote. So, you know, it's 1982, guys. There's no caller ID. There's no way to show who was phoning your home, like a telemarketer, a stranger, whatever. If the phone rang, you'd just answer it. They had no way of doing any of that stuff in 1982. So of course, anytime the phone rang, Cindy would answer it if she was close to it, obviously, and she could get to it. And that's why she kept answering these phone calls, because at that point in time, you'd never know who was on the other end of the phone. So eventually, I should say in a fairly short period of time, the calls did turn threatening. So of course, Cindy did what everybody is supposed to do, and she went to the Vancouver Police Department. I do not have the highest opinion of the Vancouver Police Department, particularly after the Willie Pickton case. Of course, we haven't talked about that yet, guys. We will get into it at some point in time. It would be a very huge case, so I'm just going to pace myself for a little bit. It's even bigger than the Ted Bundy case, guys. You know that Willie Pickton had upwards of 49 victims, and that's according to him. But the Vancouver Police Department has been known to be filled with bias, homophobia. They're racist. they're misogynistic. This was even from a report that was just recently released. Now, I know they're trying harder from that angle, but there's a lot of crimes that they just didn't investigate in the way they should have because they were biased towards the case in some way. They did start an investigation into Cindy's case, and this apparently was the start. This right here was the start of an almost 7-year ordeal for Cindy. She was being stalked and harassed by someone. At this point in time, she had no idea who it was, but the phone calls were starting to become more intense. Now, the police investigated for about 3 months at this point in time after the initial phone call that she made to them. And at this point, the phone calls started ratcheting up and increasing. According to Otto, which is her father, the family felt that Cindy herself was not telling them everything she knew. They felt that she was being evasive about things, and there were reasons for it. We're going to get into that later. But they felt that she was being evasive and that she was hiding information. And the police started to believe this too later on as well. Her father said she didn't want to talk very much about the harassment. She would mention it, but she wouldn't go into detail about it. And her father said, quote, "She was very, very reluctant to talk about this right to the end. And our feeling was that she was withholding something extremely vital," end quote. So according to the reports that were made every time that Cindy phoned in a tip, or every time that Cindy went to visit the BPD, and there are over 100 of these, like over 100 guys. I want you to know that this stalking wasn't just something that happened over a year or 2-year period. This was an almost 7-year period that Cindy went through this. So there are over 100 reports made, and I'm sure there are probably times she didn't report everything. So who knows how many times the incidents actually occurred. Cindy, things ratcheted up from just the phone calls, just the harassing phone calls, to other deeds. So Cindy would report hearing somebody creeping around outside. She could hear them, she said, prowling around outside. She also reported her porch lights were smashed out, and her phone lines were cut at various intervals. She once found 3 dead cats hanging in her garden. Yeah, 3 dead cats. And she started to get orders of raw meat sent to her house. And these were orders she never ordered for herself. For some reason, this person, I should say, decided to send packages of raw meat to her house, probably in the hopes that they'd sit outside for a while and start to stink, you know? She started to get that. Or due to some of the messages, because some of the messages did say, "Cindy, you're dead meat." Maybe they were symbolic. Regardless, she also started to get hand-delivered messages, guys. Obviously, these did not go through the mail. They were just left on her doorstep and also on her car windshield. They weren't in handwriting, though. They were more like in the stencil, you know, like how we used to stencil letters. I don't know if that's still a thing, guys. I don't know if kids still do that, but stenciled letters, or they were the creepy magazine ones, you know, where you cut the letters out of magazines and you arrange them to make a word. That was the type of messages she was receiving. They said things like, quote, "You are dead," end quote, quote, "Soon, Cindy," quote, "You will die," and quote, "Cindy, I see you," with a picture of an eye. I'm going to show you some of them in a few minutes too, guys. She also once came home and found her dog Heidi cowering and shaking in a pool of her own urine with a quote, "cord wrapped around her neck," end quote. So this person was somehow able to get to her dog as well. I don't know if her dog was kept inside. I'm assuming probably, but this person was able to somehow get to her home. So Cindy, of course, at this point in time, if you've been stalked before, you know how it feels. I guess like a little side point I should mention, I know what stalking feels like. I was also stalked for a very long length of time, stalked and harassed, kind of like Cindy. No meet or anything like that. It was mostly through phone calls and text messages, things of that nature. I can't talk about it too much, guys. It's still an ongoing thing. Like, it's still a case. So I can't talk about it too much, but I do know what it feels like. And you start to get anxious. You start to get really nervous. You're always looking over your shoulder because you never know when this person's going to call you, when this person's going to text you, what's going to happen, what they'll say. And people are really ingenious now, right? In 1982, you could just call people no caller ID. But now, what with Messenger and the fact that we can see who's calling us, we won't answer, right? People that are being stalked now will be stalked from different messenger names or texted from different phone numbers, so you might not automatically know who it is, or through emails, things of that nature. It's not so much letters that you get sent, but they'll leave specific details like, I saw you do this, or I heard that this happened. And it's really, really creepy to know that somebody's been watching you. So of course, Cindy was always a beautiful and vibrant girl, and this changed her completely. She started being, quote, or she started looking, quote, tired and frayed. She was nervous. She was anxious. She didn't know what to do. Like always, she was looking over her shoulder, and she was very fearful because she never knew if or when these threats would become even more violent. So according to Cindy's good friend, Agnes Woodcock, Cindy thought after the start of the threatening notes and of course the magazine clipping, oh god, they're so creepy. They're creepy like face mask creepy. Remember how we talked about creepy with Ted Bundy with a nylon face mask? Yeah, these notes made from magazines also creep me out to that extent. I don't know why, they just always look so sinister. After she started to receive these notes, she started thinking, and she did voice this to her friend Agnes, quote, he, the person that was doing this, doesn't want to kill me. He wants to scare me to death, end quote. So one night in January of 1983, Agnes decided that she was going to go and visit Cindy at her home. This was in the evening. So she knocked on Cindy's door. Of course, Cindy didn't answer. She just figured Cindy was in the tub. But then Agnes started hearing strange noises. So she decided she was going to investigate. She walked around into the backyard and found Cindy there, cowering. It looked like Cindy was either trying to get away or like she was trying to hide from something. And she had a pair of nylons, they call them nylons, like pantyhose, guys, you know what I'm talking about, tied really tightly around her neck. Cindy said at this point in time, when Agnes, of course, took everything off and Cindy was able to talk about it, I don't think Cindy went to the hospital with this one. There's no record that said she did. But Cindy said that she had gone into her garage sometime earlier to get a box because she needed something in it. And while she was there, she was attacked by somebody from behind. She didn't see this person, but she did notice that this person wore, quote, white sneakers, end quote. So at this point in time, Cindy's super freaked out. This is the first time that someone has tried to attack her in her own home too, guys. Like, she's in her garage, she's in her own area, her private area. So she's very freaked out at this point in time. It's not just letters, it's not just phone calls, it's not just weird meat deliveries, it's not just dead animals. This person has now attacked Cindy. So she's very afraid at this point in time. She pulled out all the stops. She did everything that we are taught that she's supposed to do. She left a paper trail with the VPD by calling in all of the, well, most of the incidents. I'm going to assume most of the incidents because she still trusted the police at this point in time. We're going to get to that. Every time she received some type of threat, she would call it into the police. So that way she's creating a paper trail so that they know of when specific attacks and the frequency of the attacks. She also moved into another house, a different address. She changed the color of her car, and she legally changed her last name from Makepeace, I'm assuming she still went by Makepeace, to James, all in an effort so that this person couldn't find her and keep doing this. I'm assuming she also got a new phone number too, but it didn't matter. The attacks still went on. I should say the harassment and the threats still went on as well. So at this point in time, Cindy decided to hire herself a private investigator to see if he could find out who was behind these threats, harassment, the stalking, and the attacks. His name is Ozzy Caban. Police continued, of course, to investigate the incidents, but at this point in time, they were suspicious. Like I said, whenever they interviewed Cindy, she was evasive and it would seem like she was leaving parts of the story out. So they became suspicious that Cindy herself was involved in this, like she either set it up somehow with some people, or that Cindy was doing this to herself. They started to have the more jaded point of view at this point in time, and they were not taking things probably as seriously as they should have. They felt that, according to the investigators, they felt that, quote, she simply would not act as a normal victim, end quote. And as such, of course, they doubted all of her reports. Now, guys, there's no way of knowing how you're going to act when this happens to you. No way of knowing. Most of us think, oh, well, I'd just immediately go to the police. I'd give them the phone numbers. They would do whatever. But sometimes when it first starts happening, you tend to think it's going to stop. You tend to think if you tell the person to stop, if you know who it is. I mean, there's a lot of people that are stalked by people they don't really know. But if you know who the stalker is, you feel like if you say, okay, I've had enough, that's enough, you have to stop now, the person's going to stop. You have hope that this is going to happen. And sometimes you don't go to the police for a long time. Then when you do, police want to start questioning you. Like, what have you done to make this happen to yourself? They do put you in the light. They have to ask these type of questions, but they do make you feel like it's your own fault that you're being stalked, or they can make you feel that way, I should say. Of course, there's a lot of people who are very sympathetic. There's a lot of police officers who are, and they are doing their job. They still have to question you, but sometimes they feel less sympathetic than they should. And there's a lot of times that police don't take stalking seriously, particularly if you're being stalked by a stranger or just an acquaintance. They'll usually take it more seriously if it's an ex-partner, because they feel like this ex-partner could kill you. And there's two different routes, guys. If you are stalked by a man, that man is either going to give up and target somebody else, or they're going to kill you. It's a fact, guys. I'm sorry, it is. If you're stalked by a woman, and we don't know if Cindy was stalked by a man or a woman, this person, if it's a woman, they're just going to keep going. They'll just keep going and going and going until whatever happens. It's not that they're necessarily going to kill you. They're just going to keep following you and keep doing this to you. So Tilly said Cindy told her that the real reason why she was so evasive, remember I said we'd get into it, was because the attacker, when he originally attacked her in in January of 1983, sorry guys, when he originally attacked her from behind when she was getting the box, she told her mother that he held a knife to her throat and said that if she mentioned this to anybody, or if she told anybody about what was going on, what was happening, all of the things that were happening, not just little bits and pieces like she was telling people, but all of the things that were happening, he would go after her sister and kill her sister, and then he would kill her mother. He told her to keep her mouth shut. So Cindy was intensely afraid that this person would start targeting her family. That's why she was so elusive with details. So I also want you guys to know, at this particular point, this was not an everyday occurrence. It was more psychological in nature. The attacks would go on for a period of time, and it would be a barrage of almost daily threats, and then they would stop for a period of time. So Cindy could never relax. This happens a lot with stalking. People don't seem to understand this. The person will have this barrage, and then maybe their anger subsides at you for a little bit, or they get caught up in something else. So it stops for a period of time, and then you start to relax. And as soon as you start to relax, it starts all over again. So it was a stop-start type of mentality to the point, but there was no pattern. Cindy could never ascertain a pattern. It's not like it stopped in the fall and started again in spring. It was nothing like that. It would stop for a little while, then start again. then stop. So it would make Cindy feel even more fearful, more unnerved, more on the edge and off balance, because she never knew when it would start again or when it would stop again. She was never able to relax because there was no pattern to the way the threats, the harassment, the stalking occurred. There was just no pattern at all to it. Maybe after the first couple times, Cindy was like, oh, I can relax a little bit. But by the third cycle, she'd be like, well, always constantly looking over her shoulder, right? Like, I don't know when it's going to start again. I'm afraid for when it's going to start again. So, of course, she's always running off of adrenaline at this point. Now, Cindy did keep journals about what was going on, and about her psychological state at this point in time as well. She wrote everything down, but she mentioned specifically how each of the threats, the phone calls, everything, how it would make her feel and how it was messing with her mind psychologically. She would talk about that. Of course, she was married to a psychiatrist, so she'd know a little bit about it. And she was also a nurse, so she would know a little bit about it. This also seems very suspicious to me, by way of the police. Like, if she's writing down how these attacks are making her feel, it makes me wonder why police didn't take it more seriously, and also why they felt that Cindy was targeting herself. Why would she take the time to write things down, especially about her feelings and how fearful she was, if she was doing it to herself? If she was actually doing it to herself, wouldn't she have written in her journal instead about how good she was feeling, about making people pay attention to her, I guess, in a way? Wouldn't she have written down about how satisfying it was for her to do these things to herself to some degree? Now, we're going to get into reasons why people believe that there might have been a reason for the journaling, but also a reason to still be suspicious of Cindy, but we're going to get into that later. So on January 30th of 1984, Ozzy went to Cindy's house. He actually rushed there. At some point in time, he'd given her a two-way radio just in case, this was number one for protection, so she could get a hold of him easier, but also just in case the phone lines were cut again, so this way she would have a way to get a hold of her. And he started hearing suspicious sounds coming from the two-way radio. So he went to Cindy's house immediately. He found that Cindy's house was locked up, so he couldn't get into the door. He looked through a window and he saw Cindy lying face down in her hallway. Of course, he figured she was dead at this point in time, so he kicked in the door and rushed to her side. Now, she wasn't dead at this point in time, but she did have some injuries. Specifically, this is really weird, guys. Specifically, there was a note attached to her hand with a paring knife. Like, they actually stabbed the note through her hand with a paring knife from her own kitchen. And the note said, quote, "You are dead, bitch." Sorry, guys. End quote. He, of course, immediately called 911. They came to the scene. They were able to revive Cindy for a brief period of time before taking her to the hospital, and then she eventually regained consciousness. She told Ozzy she saw a man come through her gate, and then she was hit on the side of the head with, quote, "a piece of wood or something of that nature," end quote. And she didn't remember anything else besides the attack. She said she did remember being held down and being injected with something. And I believe there were needle marks, guys. But then after that, everything went black. She has no idea what happened. As far as I know, the hospital didn't investigate that. They didn't run a toxicology screen on her to see, as far as I know, guys, don't quote me, but they didn't run a toxicology screen on her to see what she was injected with. They just let it go for some reason. Instead, at this point in time, she's been attacked twice, guys. She almost died this time. But instead of police becoming concerned about her, they started to question her mental health That's what they felt that they should be doing, because they, once again, thought that Cindy did this to herself. They figured she stabbed herself through the hand, that she had some way incapacitated herself by hitting herself in the head with a piece of wood or whatever. I don't think any wood was found at the scene though either, guys. It would see, if Cindy had attacked herself, wouldn't they have seen the piece of wood? It would appear that the perpetrator took it away with him or her. But anyway, it would appear that way. They also didn't, well, they believed that Cindy had injected herself with whatever drugs that were in her system, which we have no idea what they were because there was no toxicology done at that point in time. They believed because she was a nurse, she had access to whatever, so she just injected herself. That's what they believed. So despite 2 attacks, one of which, like I said, almost killed her, more people actually became suspicious of Cindy at this point. Because police believed she was doing this to herself, or that she had hired somebody to do this to her, they didn't bother to check for fingerprints in her home. So her home was never dusted for prints to see if there were any unusual prints. Of course, Cindy's prints belonged there, and people she had invited to her home would have belonged there as well, people she knew that had been at her home. But if it was somebody that knew Cindy, they probably couldn't have canceled out the prints anyway. The thing I find most suspicious is they also didn't fingerprint the knife. They didn't check to see if anybody else's prints were on that knife. They just, I don't even know if they took it into evidence, guys. They basically just discarded it. They did nothing with it. They didn't check to see if there was another blood type. Remember, it's 1982, guys. It's still 2 years before DNA anyway. Or no, sorry, at this point in time, it is 1984. So it's just the beginning of DNA. So they wouldn't have thought to run that, but they didn't even check to see if there was a different blood type on the knife. Nothing like that, guys. Nothing at all. They did literally nothing because they believed it was Cindy. So I'm just going to bring up some pictures now, guys, so you can get the creepy nature. So this is Cindy right here. I'm just trying to get it. I hope you guys can see it. You can see it in her nursing uniform, and you can see the big picture right there. You can see how beautiful and talented she really was. And then if you look at the one black and white picture, you can start to see how that vitality is going down. If you just look at this, it also looks like she has a black eye in this one. I'm wondering if it's after one of the attacks. If you look closer, just give me 1 second, guys. I just want to bring it up. Sorry, just give me 1 second, guys. Here's some of the stenciling, like I told you. Some of the very bizarre, that's what I meant by stenciling. And there's also, I think I've got some of the creepy magazine ones. God, they still creep me out. There you go. That's what I mean by creepy. In fact, one of the messages that was left on her car windshield showed a picture of a body being wheeled into a morgue. That's the type of thing that Cindy was dealing with. So after this had been done, I should say, sorry, just give me 1 second. Ozzy, the private investigator, believed that there was no way that Cindy could have injected herself with the drugs or stabbed herself through the hand with the knife. It had to do with the trajectory, the entrance trajectory, and the angles of everything. So, of course, if I'm going to stab myself, I'm going to go like this. I believe it was either like this or like this. It was just in such a way that Cindy herself could not have done it. That's what Ozzy believed. But the police, of course, overlooked all that too. Ozzy and her family, as well as friends, believed that Cindy was being targeted. So Ozzy, her family, and the friends that she still has left, they all stood by Cindy. Everybody else, including like the court of public opinion, believed that Cindy was doing this to herself. If she was doing it to herself, though, guys, I mean, I guess one of the reasons why people figured she was doing it to herself was that she only stabbed herself through the hand instead of stabbing herself anyplace else. So they figured, oh, that was convenient, right? And of course, like I said, she was a nurse, so they figured she just drugged herself to make it look good. Cindy, however, agreed to do both a polygraph test after this attack, and to be put under hypnosis in order for her to be able to give more information. Remember, after she was injected with whatever, she had no idea what was going on. Polygraph tests, of course, you guys know now, aren't admissible in court. People still use them. It's more or less to see if somebody can pass it, although you guys do know that a psychopath can easily pass it. It's more or less used for that. Like if you pass the polygraph test, they figure, oh, you must not be lying. But this was 1982, so the court, but also police, relied on polygraph tests a lot more. So the people administering the tests after they were done said that Cindy, or concluded that Cindy had been, quote, too traumatized, end quote, by the ordeals to give them any good information. They didn't say anything was inconclusive. They just said she was too traumatized. And as such, you know, if you guys are traumatized, if you're under stress, if you're nervous, or if you're under stress, if you're nervous, anything of that nature, it can skew the results of a polygraph test, particularly if you're traumatized by something, it can skew the results. So according to Neil Hall, who is actually a journalist, he was writing this story for the Vancouver Sun. I believe it was after everything happened. He was telling Cindy's story. And I want you guys to know he is not very sympathetic to Cindy at all in his articles. He doesn't seem like he believes her either. But according to Neil Hall, there were no fingerprints left behind. However, police didn't actually look for them, so I'm not quite sure how he would know this, but regardless. And there was no corroboration of her stories from anybody else. I mean, I know that Ozzy heard things, and I know that Agnes did, but they were never there to see her being attacked. All of this was always done undercover, so to speak. It was only when Cindy was around. If Cindy had people there or anything of that nature, of course, nobody's going to attack. That's just how it happened. These incidents were always only with Cindy. Just Cindy herself. So he said that Cindy saw one person, like we've heard this before. Cindy, remember the initial attack. She said it was only one person. And also with the second attack, she said that she saw somebody coming through the gate. But she also apparently told people that she would see or hear 2 or 3 people at different points in time. So now it sounds like there's a group of people after Cindy. He said that $1.5 million had been spent of the taxpayers' money investigating the 100 plus reports that Cindy had made to the police thus far. And they had never come up with a legitimate suspect in these 100 reports. So that's why he never believed Cindy. Neil Hall never believed Cindy, particularly because the BPD never came up with a suspect. However, they were never actually looking for one because they thought it was Cindy herself. So the calls continued after the January 30th, 84 attack. And police did try to trace the calls, but the phone calls that came in were too short at that point in time to trace with that particular technology. According to Neil Hall, once again, police at this point in time did put 24-hour surveillance on Cindy's home. I think it was not so much to see if they could catch anybody doing this to Cindy, but more to see if they could see if Cindy was doing this herself, to catch her in the act. Now, they'd survey Cindy's home for days at a time. I'm not quite sure how long they did this for, guys. I want to say it was a month, but I'm not quite sure. So they'd survey her house for days at a time with up to 14 officers at a time. And of course, during this time frame, no incidents occurred. There were no threatening phone calls. There were no messages. Cindy was not attacked. There were no dead animals, nothing of that nature. Nothing happened while the police were at the home. So once again, as soon as the police would leave, of course, everything would ratchet up again. This made police even more suspicious. This made them believe that Cindy was doing this herself because we're here and nothing's happening. However, they didn't take into account the fact that the person that's stalking Cindy would also be watching her house more than likely and would know that the police were there. So obviously this person is not going to do anything knowing that police are watching the house. They never took that into account though, guys, never. And of course, as soon as the coast was clear, as soon as the police presence was gone, they would start up again. They also, interestingly enough, never checked Cindy's home for any listening devices. They never checked to see if Cindy's home was bugged by anything. It does seem like this person was able to get in. Remember, they found, Cindy found her dog. They never checked for anything of that nature. And if it was somebody that actually knew Cindy, that she'd invited into her home before, right, because they were friends or acquaintances, lovers, family members, whoever, they never checked to see if they had left any listening devices in. So on December 11th of 1985, Cindy was found dazed and confused in a ditch. She was half conscious, lying in a ditch about 9.7 kilometers from her home. She was wearing one man's glove and one man's work boot that she wouldn't have access to. She didn't live with a man at this point in time. And also, I guess it could have been Ozzy's. I'm not sure. But he never lived with her. Regardless. Nobody, as far as I know, ever identified the boot as theirs. She was suffering from hypothermia. Of course, at this point in time, it's December and it's BC, so it's not particularly warm. BC's warmer than we are, but, you know, still colder temperatures, and it would still go down at night. She had numerous cuts and bruises all over her body, and she also had a needle mark in one arm. Once again, a nylon stocking was wrapped tightly around her neck as well. Cindy said she had no idea whatsoever had happened at this point in time. She was just dazed and confused, semi-conscious, lying in this ditch, but she had no idea what had happened to her. I'm also not aware of who found her, guys. I'm not sure who found her, but she said she had no idea. Why would you go to such lengths? If you're doing this to yourself, why would you go to such lengths in the middle of winter? She could have died once again from hypothermia from this attack, and yet police still believed she did it herself. So at this point in time, due to the third attack, Cindy decided to ask her friend Agnes Woodcock and her husband Tom if she could stay with them on certain nights. I'm not sure if she ever worked night shifts at the hospital, guys. Maybe that's what she meant, nights that she wasn't working. It's also possible that she felt better at home when the attacks weren't ongoing, like when it was one of those silent periods. I would assume she asked to stay during the times when the attacks were increasing in nature, or when the harassment was increasing in nature. Sorry, I'm having problems today. So in April of 1986, Cindy was staying at Tom and Agnes's house, and she woke Tom and Agnes up and said that she was hearing noises. Now, Tom heard the noises too, just like Agnes had heard noises before, and Ozzy as well. So the three of them decided to go downstairs and investigate. And when they went to the basement, they found that it was on fire. Somebody had set fire to the Woodcock's basement. They discovered when they tried to go call 911 that the phone lines had been cut. So Tom decided he was going to rush out and go to the neighbor's house and ask them if they could call the fire department. Of course, you guys know this is before 911 was in existence. So you'd have to call the local fire department or the police department yourself. While he ran outside, he noticed there was a man standing at the curb watching the house. So he figured, oh, I'll go and ask him. He's already awake, instead of having to wake the neighbors up. When he approached this man at the curb, the man took off running, and Tom couldn't catch him. So of course he went to the neighbor's house, and 911 was called, and they came and put out the fire. Police suspected that Cindy had once again staged the whole thing, despite the fact that Tom heard the noises too, although they could have said that was the crackling of the fire or whatever, I guess. According to Neil Hall's article, police did not find any disturbances on the dust for the window leading into the basement. That would have been the entrance point. They knew that the fire was set from the inside of the house, so they figured this window would be the logical entrance point. There were fingerprints on the window, but they were old fingerprints. They had dust on them and everything. And there was no disturbance in the dust itself on the windowsill. So police naturally assumed, well, how did this person get in if not from this point? It doesn't make any sense. It would seem like somebody in the house had set the fire. However, as far as I know, guys, they didn't check any other access points, like a window in a kitchen. Maybe that was open and then they went down to the basement through that. They only checked the basement window. They didn't see if anything, if maybe somebody had forgotten to lock a door or anything of that nature. They didn't check that out. They also never suspected Tom and Agnes either. Who's to say that maybe Tom wasn't doing it? I doubt he was. They seem like really good friends. I'm sorry. No blame to Tom and Agnes. But they never questioned Tom and Agnes either about this. Just about, oh, you heard the fire. Apparently, they were also equally as suspicious because on that night in April, Cindy had walked her dog Heidi at 3 a.m. She had just walked her around the neighborhood. And they said that if you were truly afraid, you wouldn't be walking your dog by yourself at 3 a.m. in the middle of the night. I don't know when the fire was set, guys, or when the fire department was called. So I can't say if this was before or after the attack. But they didn't take into account the fact that maybe it was just a short distance that Cindy walked so that the dog could do its business. They didn't take that into account. They didn't take into account how well lit the area might have been or how close to Tom and Agnes's home she actually was. They never took any of that into account. They just said, oh, you were outside walking your dog. Maybe Cindy didn't want to wake anybody up. Maybe she was too afraid to wake anybody up. Maybe this was just her last bit of her saying, hey, you know, I've got to do this. I've got to live some life. I don't know, guys. But of course, her walking around with her dog at night made the police even more suspicious. At some point in time after this, or at some point in time, guys, I couldn't pinpoint actually when it was, Cindy's own garage was also set on fire. So after the fire at Agnes and Tom's house, Cindy's doctor decided to put her in the local hospital's psychiatric ward. He said she was feeling suicidal. I'm sure as any of us would. I mean, you've been attacked 3 times. There's been a fire set. There's been numerous messages. There's been a lot of harassment. And this is now 1986. This started in 1982. It's been almost 4 years, guys. Of course, Cindy's very troubled at this point in time. According to the psychotherapist at the hospital, Cindy's biggest fear was not just being attacked. Cindy's biggest fear was being not believed by other people. Her biggest fear was that other people did not believe that she was going through this ordeal. And because she felt that nobody believed her, it actually increased her descent into insanity. Let's just say, sorry guys, that's what they said, not so much me. It actually drove her insane. The fact that this was ongoing to her, but also coupled with the fact that nobody seemed to believe her. She's crying out. She's trying to go through all these avenues for help, and nobody's listening to her. I mean, her family and close friends were, but nobody within the community and nobody that should be able to help her was listening to her. This was also coupled with the fact that the harassment would start and then stop suddenly, and there was no set pattern to it, like I said before. So this even further threw her off balance and on edge. So it really does make sense that this would heighten everything for Cindy and that it would make her feel suicidal. She's afraid. The only way that she could figure in her mind for it to end, because the police aren't really doing anything, but they can't seem to find anybody either, is if she took her own life. And she also may have thought that that would protect her family as well. Cindy, but of course, even throughout this, police did not believe her ordeal. They still felt she was doing it to herself. So Cindy eventually told her doctor her family doctor, and the psychotherapists and psychologists at the hospital, that she felt she did know who was doing this. She was finally ready to name a name. And whose name do you think she named, guys? Her ex-husband, Dr. Roy Makepeace. She believed he was behind it all. Makes sense. Nothing started until after Cindy initiated divorce. Just saying. So after about 10 weeks in the hospital, Cindy was released. And she was actually ready to tell people now who she thought was doing this to her. She did tell her family that she thought it was her ex-husband. And according to Otto, Cindy was convinced that, of course, the police weren't doing anything. And she was convinced they didn't believe her. So she said, quote, "If the police can't solve this, then I'll solve it for them," end quote. So she actually had gone to the police. I didn't mention this, guys, but she actually had gone to the police and told them that she believed that her ex-husband was responsible for what was going on with her. They still didn't really believe her, though. And I think that's why she felt that she had to start looking into this more herself. She was, I guess, becoming less of a victim and more of an activist in her own case at this point in time. She didn't want to just live with fear. She wanted to be able to prove that her ex-husband was doing this to her. If he was. That's who she thought was doing it. So, of course, police did question Dr. Roy Makepeace. He denied everything. Said he wasn't culpable in anything. I mean, he's a psychiatrist. He knows what he's doing and saying, and he can make people, he can convince people of things. But regardless, he said he had nothing to do with it. But he did, however, give police an answering machine tape. Someone with a raspy voice had called him and left a message threatening Cindy, not Roy, but Cindy. Now, I find it really convenient that during this time, when they're questioning Dr. Roy, this message comes through. I find it really convenient. I also wonder why he didn't immediately turn it over to the police when he first got it. Who knows how long he'd been sitting on it. I just find it very convenient for him that he can say, "Oh, well, I got this message threatening Cindy too, so I obviously couldn't have done it." Now, police did. Also, I also find it weird because the stalker knew that Cindy and Dr. Roy hadn't lived together for quite an extended period at that point in time. You know, he would know from monitoring Cindy's house that they didn't live together. He didn't call Cindy's house and leave the message. He somehow got a hold of the ex's phone number to leave the message. Now, like I said, I don't think they were acrimonious or anything like that. I just think they just didn't have anything to do with each other. I think it was just one of those, it wasn't a friendly divorce, I don't think. It was just okay, we're divorced now. You know, we're not mean to each other, but we're not really paying attention to each other either. I find it really odd that this person would call Dr. Roy's place and leave this message. This message said, quote, "Cindy, dead meat soon," end quote. Now, police did actually analyze the voice. And they said that the voice, this raspy voice, was a woman's voice and that it was likely Cindy herself. Also weird. If she's going to call somebody, why call her ex-husband? Why call her ex-husband and leave that message? Why not call one of her family members who believes her? But then again, if it was her doing this, maybe she thought that he would give it to the police. She knew they were investigating him and she thought maybe it would make him look more guilty. I mean, that could be, I'm not sure. I really don't know when the phone call came in to begin with. Now, according to police, Dr. Roy Makepeace said he thought that Cindy was suffering from, quote, "a split personality," end quote. So he figured that Cindy didn't realize that she was doing this to herself, that somehow her personality had split and that this part of her was doing this to her. Cindy, of course, It's possible Cindy wouldn't have been conscious of it. You have to get into the history of dissociative identity disorder in order to talk about that. And we'll talk about that in the theories, guys. But he said that Cindy was a split personality and therefore was likely doing it to herself. And that was good enough for the police. They already worried about her mental illness or her mental capacities at that point in time. She had just been in a psychiatric ward. So, of course, this being her ex-husband, who did know her, she had lived with him for quite some time, and a psychiatrist, they of course believed him, and they stopped investigating him. I do want to point out, though, there is absolutely no proof that links Dr. Roy Makepeace to this case. It's interesting to note, though, that in her 10-week stay in the psychiatric ward, where she was tested and talked to multiple times, etc., no other doctor, no psychologist, and no psychotherapist, no one else at that hospital ever saw signs that Cindy had a split personality. They also, no one in her family noticed signs. It's quite odd for it to show up at 36 years of 36 years of age. It's usually brought on by intense amounts of abuse at some point in time in your life, usually in childhood. It causes your brain to split as a coping mechanism. Now, Cindy hadn't had a bad childhood, as far as I know. There was no abuse that anybody in the family knew of anyway. It's possible she could have kept it hidden, but I'm just saying there's nothing that points to that. I guess they're trying to say that the impetus for the split was her divorce. But it was Cindy herself that initiated the divorce. So she wasn't overly traumatized by her husband signing divorce papers, right? She initiated it. But who can say for sure? After she had gone to the police with her suspicions about her husband being her ex-husband being her stalker, the incidents started to increase again. And it's also interesting to note that Cindy herself started stalking Dr. Roy Makepeace at this point in time. She started following him around so that she could get evidence on him and give it to the police and say, well, look, I saw him do this. And it was at that point in time that I got the phone call. So she was taking a more active part in her own case, because remember, she said if the police couldn't do it, she'd do it herself. So she started surveying her ex-husband to see what she could find out at this point in time. So regardless, she did call police, and they sent over a detective named Pat McBride. Now, Pat McBride had developed a, quote, keen interest in Cindy's case, end quote, and he moved into Cindy's house for a short period of time so that he could be there just in case something happened. Of course, nothing happened in the duration that Pat McBride was there. No harassment, no incidences, no attacks, nothing like that. Nothing happened when he was there. But then again, if her house was being watched, the person watching would know that somebody else was there. Regardless, he moved into the house for a short period of time, and the two of them apparently, allegedly, became lovers for a short period of time as well. I don't know if this is true. I'm just going to say allegedly. Some sources say yes, some sources say no. Regardless, after a couple weeks or after a few weeks of nothing going on, Pat McBride moved out. On October 26th of 1988, Cindy got home from work and was attacked in her actual carport. I don't know who found her, guys, so sorry, but she was found. She was found unconscious in her car. She was hog-tied. Her arms and legs were hog-tied together with a nylon. There was also another nylon wrapped tightly around her throat. Once again, like most of the previous other attacks. She was naked from the waist down. And she had duct tape over her mouth. This was ostensibly to stop her from breathing, although it could have also been to stop her from screaming. So nobody could have found her. She did go into a coma from this attack, but she was able to recover. And of course, you know, she let police and everybody know again. But once again, police said, oh, you probably did that to yourself. Now, I'm not sure how she would have been able to hog tie herself. That's kind of hard. But regardless. Now, by the spring of 1989, and this could be because Cindy was taking control of things herself in a way, right? She was, you know, telling people it was her ex-husband that was doing it. She was watching him to see if he was watching her. Sorry, it's not funny, guys, but you know what I mean? She was trying to solve who did this herself. So it's possible that because she was taking more of an active interest in her own case, she told her family that in the spring of 1989, the attacks seemed to, and the harassment and stalking seemed to have lessened at this point in time, and that she was feeling better for the first time in 6.5 years. So on May 25th of 1989, sorry guys, 6 years and 7 months after Cindy's ordeal had started, she disappeared. She had gone to work that day, and she had picked up her check as well. When she was done work, she went to a local mall to cash the check. I guess you could do that at that point in time. Maybe there was a bank there or some service. It was the 80s. I'm not sure. So she went to the mall and cashed this check. She bought some groceries, and she also bought a gift for somebody. Sorry guys, just one second. And after that, she disappeared. No one was able to find Cindy. Her car was found later that day in a neighborhood parking lot. It was not at the mall itself, although I'm not sure if Cindy parked at the mall or if she had just parked in this neighborhood parking lot to avoid traffic. I'm not sure. When they opened up the trunk, of course, Cindy's groceries were in the trunk of the car, and the wrapped gift, as far as I know, was in the back seat. There was blood on the driver's side door. As far as I know, that blood was never tested to see if it was Cindy's or somebody else. It was never tested or blood typed. At this point in time, they could do DNA testing. As far as I know, it was never tested. There was blood there, though. And items from her wallet were found underneath of her car for some strange reason. They, of course, did do a search of sorts for Cindy, but they never saw her. That is until the morning of June 8th of 1989. So at this point in time, Cindy had been missing for 2 full weeks. There was no sightings of her. Nobody saw anything, nothing of that nature. She was found in the yard, the side yard, I believe it was a side yard, of an abandoned house by a jogger. The jogger could clearly see Cindy's body from the road, and of course, Cindy was dead. Sorry guys. She was bound hand and foot, not hog-tied, guys. I think her hands were tied behind her and her feet were bound behind her. She also had a black nylon stocking wound tightly around her neck. Her body at this point in time was in full rigor mortis, and decomposition had started to set in. She had been clearly seen from the road at this particular point by the jogger on that particular day. But the jogger had also used this route at least twice in the 2 weeks prior to Cindy being found, like just after she disappeared until the 8th. The jogger had used the same route twice and had never seen Cindy's body in that time. Regardless, Cindy was in full rigor mortis, like I said, and signs of decomposition had started to set in. She also had numerous cuts and bruises all over as well. So the abandoned house, though it was abandoned and nobody like actually lived in it, was in a really high traffic area. There was a lot of high foot traffic, I should say, in this area. It was a fairly public place. There was actually a guy that was living in his van, maybe 5 meters from where Cindy's body was found. And in that 2 weeks from disappearance to the date she was found, he never saw her body. He lived there in his van, but he never saw her body. There were also local teens that used the abandoned place as kind of like a hangout or a party place. In fact, in the week before Cindy was found, in that first week of June, they had held 2 small parties at that residence, and no one had seen Cindy's body. So it's almost like somebody had moved Cindy's body there, like she was somewhere else, and then they moved her to the abandoned lot. However, we'll get into it. So initially, police did believe that Cindy had been murdered. I mean, it looked like she'd been brutally murdered. But they changed their minds when the autopsy came in. Because according to the autopsy, Cindy had not died of asphyxiation or strangulation, nothing like that. Cindy had died of a drug overdose. The drug in her system, they found a few drugs in her system, but the main one being morphine. And another one was a drug called, oh God, flurazepam. I hope I'm saying it right. Flurazepam. This is a drug that's similar in nature to Valium. And this drug had actually been prescribed to Cindy to deal with her insomnia from everything that had been ongoing. So they found that in her system as well. And some other drugs, but they never mentioned what the other drugs were. Sorry, guys. The autopsy also indicated that Cindy had died May 25th, on or about May 25th. You got to keep questioning yourself. Then where was her body? How come nobody was able to find her body before that day? It was a high traffic area, and she was clearly seen by the jogger who had used the same route twice prior and not seen Cindy. The squatter lived 5 meters away from there, and teens had been throwing parties there, but nobody in that 2-week time had seen Cindy. However, they said that she had died May 25th of 1989, on or about May 25th. Police, of course, like I said, changed their mind about the manner of her death. They claimed that she had injected herself with a high level of morphine, enough to overdose herself, and then had walked about 1 kilometer from her house to this abandoned park, or 1 kilometer from her car to this abandoned home, and had staged the scene herself. They said that even though she had administered such a, even though she had, this is their theory, they said that even though she had administered this high dose of morphine, and she is a nurse, so she would know how much it would take to kill herself. It would have taken 15 to 45 minutes for it to kill her. So she would have had enough time to get to the vacant house and to tie herself up and scrape herself up and cut herself up and tie the nylon tightly around her neck. She would have had enough time to stage the scene. This is according to the police. Now, according to her dad, Otto, he said there was no way that Cindy could have tied herself up like that. But like, because her hands were behind her back, I'm assuming that's what he meant. And her feet were also bound. However, I guess they police hired a knot expert, and he proved that he could tie the same knots that had been used on the bindings that were on Cindy. He said that he was able to, or he showed that he was able to tie those knots himself in 3 minutes. However, this is a knot tying expert. I don't think Cindy was. But regardless. Otto, her father, also pointed out that there was no syringe found at the abandoned lot. There were 2 cigarette butts found there, and they were from a brand that Cindy did not smoke. But those cigarette butts were never tested. I don't even know if they were really regarded as evidence. I have no idea what the police did with them afterwards. But they may have figured, because the teenagers and the squatter, they may have figured that they belonged to them. Regardless, they were never tested either. So, like I said, Otto said there was no syringe found in the area, and he's right, there was no syringe found at the abandoned lot. So police said that the reason for this was that Cindy injected herself somewhere else and then walked the distance. Either that, or Cindy took an oral pill while she was at the lot, and that's how she committed suicide. I think there were needle marks, guys. Regardless. Otto also pointed out that there was no container in the area that could have had like liquid morphine in it. There was no container at all. And even if there was, I doubt it would have been tested, but there was no container that showed that she took a drink to swallow the pill, or that she ingested liquid morphine either. There was nothing like that. The coroner in Vancouver, however, did not rule Cindy's death a suicide, nor did he rule it as a murder or an accident. He said that Cindy died of a, quote, unknown event. So he wasn't listening to the police, but he wasn't listening to other people either. He said that Cindy died of some type of unknown event. Now, I do want to point out that, of course, Cindy's parents and Ozzy also believe, they still believe, and so do a lot of other people, guys. If you really, I mean, there are some other YouTube videos. Get interested in this case. Dig for yourself a little bit, guys. I'm serious. I myself believe that Cindy was the target of murder, but the police, according to the police, this case is closed and that Cindy committed suicide. Of course, Ozzy and Otto and Tilly are deceased now, but up until they died, believed that, and the rest of her family believed that somebody was targeting Cindy, and that the police, of course, bungled the investigation. They did by not investigating at all, and they didn't want to admit that they made mistakes. So therefore, that's why the police said that Cindy's death was a suicide and refused to look into it anymore. So a public inquest was held for Cindy's death. It was a suspicious death, right? It's an unknown death. So, of course, an inquest is held into that. 84 witnesses were called. Nothing came of it, guys. They couldn't judge the case one way or another. Just unknown event. I do want to point out, though, that one of Cindy's sisters and Dr. Roy Makepeace also received harassing and threatening calls after the inquest was done. But police said that these phone calls were just pranks done by local people. They never looked into that either. So guys, what really happened to Cindy James? There's the question. What really happened to Cindy James? This is a lot of stuff. She went through a lot of stuff. It was almost 7 years worth of attacks. She was attacked 5 times. This is a lot of stuff. What do you guys think happened to Cindy James? First theory. Cindy did this to herself. For some reason, it's a two-pronged, it's actually three-pronged. If you believe that she had a split personality, knowing what dissociative identity disorder is, the original host doesn't know about the other personalities until they're told about them, or until they see them themselves. You know what I mean? You can see them on camera or on film, or somebody tells you were acting differently. They usually don't know about them until they go to a psychiatrist, psychologist, mental health expert. And the mental health expert says, oh my God, you have dissociative identity disorder. I saw this, this, and this, and this. Usually they'll refer to that as losing track of time. Maybe they're sitting in their car one day just going to a store, and all of a sudden it's 3 days later and they're half naked in an abandoned parking lot. They have no idea how they got there. That could be a sign of that. To be honest with you guys, if you have a split personality or dissociative identity disorder, multiple personality disorder, whatever people choose to call it, it is supposed to be dissociative identity disorder. It's usually, I would say almost 100% of the time, due to childhood trauma. And when I say childhood trauma, I'm talking about severe physical, sexual, emotional abuse to the point where your mind is a good thing, guys. It's a great thing, and it can devise ways to keep you safe. And they use these other personalities come forward as a way to keep the initial host safe. For them to lessen their awareness of the abuses going on, for them to not have to keep that trauma in. There's better ways to say it, guys. You can look it up if you want to. Cindy never showed signs of this at any point in time before. And if you're going to, 36 does seem to be a little old to be doing this. Even for Cindy was 44 when she died. So it's also really interesting that she'd be in her 40s even when this came about. But regardless, it could have happened. So there's the first theory that Cindy was a split personality, and that she was harassing herself for whatever reason, to get back at herself for whatever reason. Number 2 is that it was an accident. Maybe Cindy was doing this to herself. Maybe you know, she'd staged the scene so many times before, if you believe that Cindy did this to herself, with the nylons tied tightly around her, the hog tying, etc., etc., etc. Maybe at this point in time, she went too far and accidentally strangled herself, although she didn't die of strangulation, guys. She died of a drug overdose. So of course people thought she set the scene. I'd still like to know where her body was within those 2 weeks. I'd still like to know, guys, if you're dead, how'd you get up and walk there? If she died on the 25th, how was she not found until the 8th? It doesn't make a lot of sense. I do want to point out that Cindy was a nurse, so she would know, and she did have a prescription for that other drug that was found in her body. So she would know how much to inject herself with to kill herself, guys. She would also have access to those drugs as well. But there's another theory that goes along with Cindy doing herself, that she committed suicide. One of the reasons being was that she was suicidal in the hospital. She did say that she was. Sorry, guys. I can't find it. She did say, she used to write notes to herself when she was in the hospital. And one of the notes said, quote, "I still feel as if suicide is my best option in an unbearable situation. As soon as I get out of here, I will carry on my plan." End quote. So it's possible that her other personality did this, if you believe that, but it's also possible that somebody really was stalking Cindy and that she couldn't take it anymore. So she staged her suicide in such a way and in such a public place so that people would take notice. It's possible. It's not plausible. I don't believe in this theory at all. I really don't believe that Cindy did this to herself. But regardless, that is a theory that's out there. So theory number 2, a stranger or acquaintance. You guys know that a lot of the time when you're stalked by somebody, I shouldn't say a lot of the time. A lot of the time when people are stalked, it's by exes. But a lot of the time, you know, the other times, you can be stalked by a stranger or an acquaintance, someone you barely know. Cindy was a nurse, so perhaps somebody that she had helped at the hospital decided that they took a liking to her, took a fixation to her, and they started to stalk her. And maybe when she wouldn't return their interests, maybe they were interested in her, and maybe when she wouldn't return or couldn't return their interests, they decided to stalk her. They were suddenly angry with her and they wanted revenge on her. It's possible. It's also possible it could have been a former student. I know she dealt with preschool children, or a parent of a former student. She dealt with preschool people, so some of the parents would have been in her age range. It's possible one of them became fixated on her. She's dealing with children with emotional problems and behavioral problems. And she's also counseling them. It's possible that somehow they developed a crush on her at some point in time, and then years later they tried to initiate something and Cindy wouldn't go for it, so they stalked her that way. It's possible it could have been a parent taking a liking to her, finding out she's newly single. She didn't reciprocate, and so they started stalking and harassing her. These things are possible. It's likely that whoever was doing this could have very well been somebody that Cindy didn't know. And that's why she wasn't able to prove anything. Of course, she did have her suspicions it was her ex-husband. I'm just saying it's possible. This person knew a lot about her. They could have been watching her for some time. It's highly possible that she in some way encountered this person. Maybe it was a person that worked at a convenience store that she frequented. Maybe it was a person from the grocery store, a store in the mall, someone that she got coffee from, anything like that. It could have been just a random person who took a liking to Cindy and either couldn't vocalize it or Cindy rejected, and as such, they did this. Another theory would be that this would be Pat McBride, the detective that had such a keen interest in Cindy's case. Of course, Pat McBride, being a cop, was never investigated. And I do want to point out that most of this stuff took place before Pat McBride showed up on the scene. Is it possible that maybe he at some point in time had seen Cindy before and became fixated on her? And that's why he showed such a keen interest in her case. Maybe he was just waiting for a time when he could get into her house and become romantically involved with her. It's possible. But at the same point in time, these incidents had been occurring for a while. I have no idea how long Pat McBride was on the force for. I do want to say it's interesting to note that the police never looked into him, though. If he had been lovers with Cindy, he should have been looked into. It could also have been a different ex. Maybe it was an ex from high school that somehow, maybe this person hadn't lived in Richmond for a while and then decided to come and visit, then decided to move back to Richmond, look up Cindy, figure out that she's divorced from her husband, started stalking her that way. Maybe this person had a fixation on her for a long time. Whatever the reason being, somebody was doing this. So it could have been an ex-lover at some point. And of course, the biggest one, Dr. Roy Makepeace. I mean, he was looked at, and like I said, police said there was absolutely no evidence that connected him. But he's a psychiatrist, guys. He would know how to emotionally screw with somebody really easily. He would know how to do that. He would also be able to give police information, like when he said that he figured Cindy was a split personality. He's a psychologist. Of course police are going to say, or sorry, a psychiatrist. So of course police are going to say, oh, you know, this guy's a psychiatrist. He'd know. So if he feels like Cindy's doing that, then it must be true. It's also interesting to note that Dr. Roy Makepeace never once diagnosed Cindy with anything in the years they were living together. However, because they had lived together for 16 years, he definitely would have known what would make her afraid, what buttons to push with her, and what would psychologically torment her. It's possible that this stuff happened 4 months after Cindy initiated a divorce from him. Maybe he didn't want Cindy to be with anybody else. Maybe he still thought of Cindy as his. Maybe he thought if he scared her enough, she would come back to him. It could have been any number of reasons. Maybe he just wanted revenge on her for filing for divorce from him. Maybe he was mad she was going to take some of his money. Regardless, maybe he really did think he could scare her into living with him or into coming back to him. And then when he found out that she had allegedly become lovers with Pat McBride, maybe this really made him mad, and that's why he finally killed her. Remember, that was 1988, and she's dead by May of 1989. I'm just saying. It's possible. He would definitely know how to manipulate people. Maybe he's got a split personality that he didn't know about. I'm just saying, he would definitely know. And as a doctor, he probably would have access to morphine as well, or know people that he could get it from. This was the 80s, guys. It was a lot easier back then. It's possible. It's also possible he could have hired somebody to do this for him. I mean, by the time Cindy died, he would have been about 62, guys. Not that that doesn't mean he can't be spry. I know a lot of spry 62-year-olds. But it's possible he hired somebody else to do this for him, for whatever reason. Those are my theories, guys. Those are the theories and some of my theories. But what do you guys think happened to Cindy James? Let me know in the comments down below. Do you think this was suicide? Do you think Cindy did this to herself? Do you think she was murdered? Let me know in the comments down below. I hope you guys all have a good week, and I will see you guys next time. Bye for now.